body for volunteering in New South Wales. Grow communities and bring people together through volunteering.
You're listening to The Voice of Volunteering. I'm your host, Ben Hillier, and today we're talking with the CEO of Youth Action, Kate Munro, about youth volunteering. Welcome everyone to the Voice of Volunteering podcast, where we give you practical tips to improve your volunteering practice and meet the national standards for volunteer involvement. Today I'm talking to Kate Munro, the CEO of Youth Action. Kate has over 30 years' experience in the youth and community services sector, specialising in youth participation, child and human rights, youth development and systemic advocacy in NGO, local and state government. She's worked in a range of different direct service roles with young people throughout her career, including case management, counselling and program management, and over the past decade has focused on working alongside young people to ensure their voices are embedded in organisational and government decision-making. She's the CEO at Youth Action, the peak body representing young people and the services that support them in New South Wales. This episode is going to cover national standards for volunteer involvement 3, 4, 5 and 6 and give you some practical ideas as to how your organisation can meet these standards and strengthen your volunteering practice. Kate, would you like to introduce yourself and give a brief overview of your work relating to volunteering?
Yeah, thanks, Ben. Thanks so much for giving me the opportunity to speak to you on this podcast. I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land I'm coming from, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and to pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to recognise over 60,000 years of connection to land, language, water and culture on this land that was never ceded and always was and always will be Aboriginal land.
Thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a bit about Youth Action and the volunteer work that you guys do?
As you said in your introduction, Youth Action is the peak body that represents young people and services who support them in New South Wales. And I guess we're not a formal volunteering organisation, but we have young people connected to the work that we do in a whole lot of different ways. And you know, a lot of that work is in an unpaid capacity. Some of that work is in a reimbursed capacity. But yeah, so young people are involved in our work through we have a number of working groups. Whenever we're working on an advocacy issue, we bring together a working group of young people to look at that issue, to develop recommendations about that, to guide that work. Often it'll be in a co-design workshop, so they'll help us to co-design. Sometimes it's content to go out to other young people. Sometimes it's training to go to young people or the youth sector. Or like I said, otherwise it's co-designing recommendations that go up to decision makers.
Right. And are there particular cohorts of young people that you find are involved in your working groups or that need additional support, or is it very broad?
Look, it's really broad. I think certainly for us, the way the way we work with young people, we have a real approach that's about there's anybody who has an interest is able to be involved in our work. There's no particular expectation about a young person having any particular skills or expertise or knowledge or experiences. Our work is very much about making sure that the lived experiences of young people are represented to decision makers, and so all young people have a capacity to be involved in that. I think, though, as with all humans, there are some young people are more comfortable in those spaces. They've done a lot of that kind of advocacy work. They've been in leaders programs, advocate programs, ambassador programs, youth councils, advisory groups. There's a lot of young people who, that sort of stepping into being involved with an organisation like us is a kind of natural step and feels very comfortable. But there's other young people who it's their first time. It's the very first time that they've ever done anything. So we spend a lot of time working with we connect to our young people through our member organisations and our connected stakeholder organisations. And so that'll often involve a lot of support in terms of, whether we've gone out and maybe sometimes young people have met us because we've come and done a consultation in their organisation or we've done some training in their organisation. Some of those young people, they're from those socially excluded groups who often aren't included in decision-making processes. They've never done anything like this before. They didn't ever think that they could. They've got a pretty low idea about themselves, about, what they could contribute. So we'll work with their organisations to have a worker, support them to, come along and be part of some of the things that we do. So we try to make it a real soft entry, kind of no wrong door opportunity. So some young people, we put an expression of interest out to be involved in something, they'll sign up straight away. Others, we might have met them 2, 3, 4 times along the way. We've connected with their organisation. We've built a relationship. They trust us. Then they feel safe enough to come along and be part of something else that we're doing.
Right. So it's kind of a process of building those relationships that then give you opportunities for recruiting in those young people to help out with your various projects and working groups and things.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, I mean, everything with young people is relational. Everything you do with young people is relational, much more so than adults. I would say that to any organisation. Those who work with young people know this, but if people aren't working with young people, the first thing young people are doing is trying to work out, can they trust you? Is this a safe place for me? Are people going to respect me? Are people going to understand me? Young people just want people who kind of understand them. Are they going to kind of get it that maybe I'm nervous, or maybe I'm anxious, or maybe I've never had an experience like this, or maybe I find sitting and reading and writing hard. Maybe I find, listening to people hard. Are young people are always doing those assessments. And when that relational piece works, young people will be connected to you really strongly and will get involved and will thrive in anything that you offer them.
Fantastic. And just a small point of clarification, when you use the term young people, what age bracket are you referring to?
Yeah, so for us, it's 12 to 24 years is our age bracket. But some organisations are 12 to 18, some are 16 to 24. There are some organisations now that are extending it up to 28. So it is a bit of a variable term, but we use the New South Wales state government criteria, which is 12 to 24.
Right. And for the younger end of that age bracket, how do you go about involving them in that kind of advocacy work? Because I imagine it would be more complicated than simply inviting a 12-year-old to join you in your working group.
Do you know, it's not. We had a group youth advocate session the other night. We just started this new program for young people to be youth advocates, and they're connecting to us and our work in a much more ongoing way. And we had 2 13-year-olds in that group.
Wow.
So no, there are young people in that younger age group who are just, they're so, they're doing amazing things. They're so strong and passionate about the issues that they care about. For us, it's less about age and more about, is it something that young people care about?
Right. That's really fantastic to hear. That's awesome.
Yeah. So again, I think, there's another kind of misconception that young people don't kind of get it or are going to need some sort of, extra understanding. They really don't. They get it. They get what it is to be involved. They get what it is to care about something and want to speak up about it. Lots of them are already kind of, they see that stuff happening in their schools, in their communities all the time. So no, they're fine. It's much more, again, I guess the two things, it's relational for young people, and is it something that young people are interested in? And if those two things are there, young people are there in drove.
Wow, awesome. So how do you go about that process of, I suppose, training and developing and retaining the volunteers from their first involvement, whatever the age, through to the more experienced ones you mentioned that have been there several times?
Yeah, look, I think again, the support that you put in is the really important thing, because it's relational. So young people want to be connected to you. They want to be connected to each other. So again, it can be less about, I want to learn, for an adult, perhaps it's, I want to learn a task, or I want to give back, or, I want to do something, but I can, I don't, it's nice if I meet other people, but it's okay if I don't. For young people, it's all about, who do you meet? How do you connect? What's the feeling of that sort of cohesiveness feeling? Have I found something that feels meaningful to me? Have I found somewhere where I feel connected and valued? So for us, with our training, with the things that we do, it's just focusing on making sure that, it's sort of basic group work, basic teamwork. Young people want to be part of a team. And that's a very common experience for young people, that's more familiar for young people than adults. Young people are part of teams, whether it's sport or whether it's groups in school or whether it's, interested. They're quite comfortable being in a team environment, and they like it when that works well. Whereas I think for adults, we're a bit distanced from that. So I might sign up for volunteer. I've been for probably over 20 years now. I've been a volunteer member with Surf Lifesaving.
Right.
The team bit isn't the thing necessarily that's high on my list of stuff, but I know for young people that is.
Yeah, right.
How do we work together to do something?
Awesome.
So, we know that takes time. We have a capacity building and participation officer, and half of their role is just doing that work with young people, because it's not something that happens. There's always got to be someone, it doesn't just happen by accident. There's somebody who's coordinating all of that, who's making sure this feels like a really kind of seamless process, whether it's, if you've got a youth advisory group, it's the same thing, to resource and to be the amount of time that goes into managing a youth advisory group. And I used to, for 10 years, I managed the youth council, and half of my job was just, doing that, getting everything, making sure the meetings were done well. We had people there, who are our guest speakers? What's it going to be? Like, how are we bringing people together? What are all the opportunities and events that we have? Who's coming? Making sure everyone knows they're all connected. All of those things take a lot of time.
Yeah, it really highlights, I think, the importance of relationships, as you've been saying.
Yeah, absolutely. For young people, I can't stress that enough. It is about, because I've had young people who've been involved, not just in this role, but in other roles in, again, an informal voluntary capacity. They were just helping out. Again, it wasn't a formal volunteering program. But I know that it was about the relationship. That was all, like, there wasn't, sometimes it wasn't even the thing that we were doing they were interested in, but they just needed somewhere to be with people who were going to be nice to them. And so they would come year after year after year, just because that was the bit they liked, the connection, the laughs, the feeling part of something. But it didn't really matter what we were doing. It was, I just like being part of that. I've got a tribe. I've got a place that I belong.
Right. What are some of the particular challenges that you see working and volunteering with the youth sector?
I think it's there's a few different things. I think that distinction between formal and informal volunteering. So when you look very broadly at what do young people do to contribute to their communities in an unpaid capacity, young people are doing a huge amount of volunteer work. So there's lots of things that they're doing that isn't, an organised volunteering movement. So I think there's that. Young people, I think it's for recognising for young people what they're doing to give back. And that might be, some of them are helping with tutoring, some of them are helping in their sport areas, some of them are, they're in a band and they perform free at live, youth events. Some of them are, donate their art for stuff. There's all kinds of really interesting things that they do. Some are doing a whole lot of caring stuff. So one is recognising it so that young people know that this is a really important thing that they're doing, and actually it's not a forgotten thing. Young people's volunteering doesn't look like older people's volunteering, and it's important that it's recognised that way. I think the other things to think about are young people are really busy. So cost of living, what we hear from young people all the time, the impacts of cost of living mean many young people, particularly that 16 to 24 age group, they're juggling school or uni study and work, and they're having to work pretty hard to be able to, cover. You've got to live in a pretty resource family now to have the privilege of not having to have a job or being able to have a very kind of low amount of hours job. So the capacity for young people to give large amounts of time for volunteering is hard. They give what they can when they can. And I think, again, that's why that really nice recognition of that informal contributions that young people make is good, because it's not, volunteering can be set up in a lot of very structured ways, and that's hard for young people to meet. Loads of our young people, their days are full from 7 in the morning when they get up till 9 o'clock at night. Now that's huge for a 16, 17-year-old or even a 15-year-old. Throw in sport and living and, any other kind of things that are going on in their lives. So I think it can look like young people are doing less, but it's really not. They just have a much less time to be able to give, but that doesn't mean that it's not important to them. I think the other thing to consider is that level of support. So it's, and that's the same in any volunteer organisation. Loads of orgs have a a volunteer coordinator. Like, it's nurturing. Like, you want to nurture those people. They are, they're gold. You want to nurture them, make them feel valued, give them opportunities that are going to be career development for them as well. And same for young people. Volunteering and, whether in a formal or an informal sense, is often the work experience that some young people have to put on their CV, particularly for young people who might not have a lot of positive work experiences. They don't have things to fall back on, and they don't have prizes from schools, and they don't have a whole lot of other things, but they're the kid that comes and helps you with all of your programs. So all of that stuff, helping them make sense of, well, that's really important and that's really valuable, and that's something that you can use as on a resume or on a job. When you go for your job, you can say, I was part of such and such youth council or such and such advisory group, or I'm on the events committee on my local youth service, or whatever those things are. So I know I'm speaking very much about what volunteering looks like in the youth sector as opposed to what young people's volunteering outside the youth sector look. But I think that there are many, many opportunities for us to recognise what young people are already doing, and then those experiences then lead them to some of that stuff outside the youth sector into other kind of volunteering movements that young people engage in.
Yeah. And I mean, we know that volunteering is a very interconnected sector anyway. There's a fair overlap between what is youth sector volunteering, what is just volunteering anyway. So I'm sure it's all helpful advice for volunteer involved organisations. I guess just in terms of things that you see groups doing outside of the youth sector, are there any particular, not necessarily problems, but common issues that you might see if you're consulting or advising with a VIO that might not be youth focused, but is trying to engage younger volunteers?
Look, I think that understanding about the time pressures that young people suffer, it's real. I think there can be a perception amongst, particularly amongst older generations, that young people are, they're lazy or they're apathetic or they're unreliable.
Those millennials, Gen Z folks
Yeah.
kind of thing. Yeah.
More often than not, they're busy, they're juggling many things. And yes, they're trying to figure out just how to be a young person at the same time. So I think being realistic in their expectations about what a young person can do, given the amount of pressures that they have. I think that, again, that trust stuff. So knowing that a young person's come to that organisation because they want it's a relational thing. They want to be able to build trust with them. They want to be able to feel related to. They want to feel, it's a place that they want to be. And I think again, sometimes, I guess this is probably just my own experience in volunteer movements, is that, again, sometimes older people, they're a bit gruff and a bit grumpy about things, and it can be a bit, we've got to get this thing done, and it's more task focused. And I think for young people, it's more relationship focused. So it's about kind of thinking about, well, what's the experience for this young person? Not because, you need to treat them as something special, but because you'll get the most out of them. You'll get the very best out of them if they feel like this is a great place to be and I like being here. And, young people have a lot of anxiety around being around different generations. Like an intergenerational experience can actually be quite hard for a young person to begin. Not all young people have that. So I think it's incredibly valuable that they get that, but it's a bit of a learning journey to go, what's it like to be around a whole people of mixed ages? They're super socially anxious. For a lot of young people come into that space feeling very socially anxious about that. And so it's being aware of that. Like, how does an organisation build those relationships between a young person and someone of a different generation? And we hear all the time from young people about how much they value mentoring. I mean, we've done had a lot of consultations with young people around employment and learning. And mentoring comes up all the time as something that's really valuable to them. And I think in a volunteering space, that's an equally applicable concept, that notion of, well, someone helps them figure out how to do the task that they have to do in that, whatever that volunteering activity is, and becomes an ally and a friend in that space for them. Rather than young people spend all day around authority figures, rather than a teacher or a boss or a supervisor or, this person, they can see this person as a mentor.
Right. So are there any sort of safety and wellbeing considerations that need to be made when working with younger volunteers, particularly those that are youth or young people?
Yeah, obviously working with children checks is a huge thing. I think that we've just done some work. It actually relates to young employees and how how things around safety and wellbeing for young employees. But I think it's mirrored in volunteering. Things like, mental health, mental wellbeing is something that is a concept that's very familiar to young people. They talk about it a lot. It's talked about in schools a lot. It's lovely that it's a very open thing. But they will, when they go into places, and volunteering again is, outside the youth sector, volunteering is a place similar to a workplace where they want someone to understand that, what does looking after their mental well-being look like? That conversation I had before, they feel socially anxious. Often they've got, a whole lot of things going on. They're juggling study pressures, they're juggling family pressures, they're juggling paid work pressures. That stuff impacts on them. And so they want the adults that are around them to have an understanding of them and help them figure that out. If they can't make a volunteering commitment, or it has to look a bit different, to be able to have that open conversation with them. So I think young people are very aware that people are quick to jump to the stereotype of young people are lazy or unreliable or not committed. And it's often not that. It's often something that's in a wellbeing space. That's a supportive conversation solves that really quickly. So I think it's about being aware that you're probably going to have a lot more conversations about mental health and wellbeing with young people than you might with older volunteers. I think the other thing, I mean, there's some obvious things in terms of safety around, again, depending on the task that young people are being asked to perform, but they've got they've got less, they've got, in terms of employment, they've got less work experience, they've got less life experience, so they're not going to see a risk in something. So it's about thinking about, again, in a volunteering sense, what are those risks? Because a young person might not see it and identify it, whereas an older volunteer might be able to say, oh, actually, I don't know how to do that, or I wouldn't feel very safe in that situation, or that's a task that might be outside of my capabilities. A young person's not going to know that. So they're just going to kind of jump in head first, all enthusiastic. So I think that there's, again, depending on what the nature of the volunteering is, but I think, with young people, they're a bit less likely to identify those things. And so being really mindful about having lots of conversations. Again, it's the relational piece. If a young person feels comfortable relating to you, they'll tell you up front, because they're really good at talking about their mental health and well-being. They'll tell you very, very much up front, oh, I don't feel comfortable about that. That just doesn't feel, I feel really nervous about it. But if they don't feel they relate to you, they'll feel like they have to impress you, and then they'll try and do it, and they'll, get themselves into strife.
Right. So would you suggest that perhaps there are adjustments that need to be made to roles and responsibilities for youth volunteers, or are there particular roles that younger people are suited to?
I think that, I mean, all of that, again, is part of that conversation. So I think that a volunteer coordinator will have, if you want younger volunteers, you'll put a lot more time into them, just in terms of having those conversations. I think in terms of the roles, no, young people have an incredible amount of skills. Like I said, even, 12 and 13-year-olds. So it's just about having a conversation with them about whatever that role is, and where does that fit with their skill set, or their lived experiences, or their expertise. In terms of other roles that are better suited, I mean, young people are, like I said, incredibly passionate and incredibly compassionate about wanting to help in their communities and contribute. So there's probably lots of things that, there are skills that young people bring that perhaps maybe older generations don't have. Sometimes that's around physical capacity, physical ability. They're just, maybe they're just more physically able to do particular things. I think in a tech space, the young people today, so many young people learn design skills at school. So whether you're looking for social media, or you're looking for, digital promotions, or digital, like, that's a very comfortable space for young people. And I think there's something about that in a volunteering sense. I think about volunteering, and certainly the young people we work with, I want it to be an experience of success. So what are the things, let's start in their comfort space. What are the things they can do? And let's build on that so that they feel really confident and comfortable. And then we can start to work in a space of, a little bit, outside their comfort space, and learning some new skills. But there's a lot of things, young people are digital natives, there's a lot of things in those kind of newer technologies areas that actually young people are great at. And so, again, there might be opportunities in volunteering spaces for stuff like that. So many, I know, in community orgs, people, you're always looking for someone to do your social media, or to do some of your design work for you, or to do your newsletter, or to do your, young people, they're learning that stuff in school. So that's second nature to them. Whereas I would find that, even if you asked me to do that, I'd be like, oh, it's probably not the best use of my skills. I'll find that one really stressful.
Yeah, absolutely. Cool. So what advice would you have for organisations who might not be in the youth sector and don't perhaps have your networks, but still want to reach out to youth and get them involved? How might they go about that?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, certainly if people are looking for young volunteers, we have a statewide network that goes out to youth services. So always happy for people to contact Youth Action, and we share our opportunities. There is a disconnect between how do young people find out about volunteering opportunities outside sort of the obvious ones, and then also how do organisations find out about young people as volunteers. So it's not as easy as it could be, I think. Look, I think most areas will have most councils have some sort of youth development officer, or someone who looks after their youth services, and they often run an interagency. So if people were looking in their local areas for young people, my first point of call would always be to say to people, go to council, find out who your youth development or your youth services person is, and go and talk to them about the opportunities that you have, and they'll have some really great ideas about how that can be promoted to young people in the area. And that will often then reach young people who might not normally find out. So that'll, those interagencies are made up of youth services in the schools, other groups that are working with young people. So it can go pretty far and wide. But councils are a really great resource for that sort of stuff. And then obviously, I know councils have their own volunteering, often have their own volunteering coordinators. But even I've worked in local government, and even those coordinators aren't as well connected to young people. So I would go to I'd start with whoever looks after young people in a council area.
Right.
But we're always happy to share anything as well.
Fantastic. Just that disconnect you mentioned, what are some of the things you think drive that disconnect between, say, traditional volunteering and younger people and their volunteering methods?
I think because there's and on both sides, I think young people have a particular perception about what they think traditional volunteering is. And then I think traditional volunteering has a perception about what they think volunteering is. And so I think that, there are young people who will readily identify, yes, I'd like to be involved in, surf lifesaving or SES or the Red Cross or Amnesty, or, they know those big known organisations. But I think that when you start to delve into volunteering, that sort of beautiful diversity and complexity of what is available becomes much more apparent. And I think that it just gets kind of missed. So schools are obviously a really great site for connecting to young people, but they have they sort of have some set things. I think it's the structures that sit around what is volunteering. That's great, but most people outside of probably the youth sector and maybe some people in the community service sector would probably still have a fairly narrow idea about what they think volunteering is. And if a young person said, I'd like to do some volunteering, they'd probably refer them to some fairly usual suspects. Whereas I think when you kind of start to think about, well, what kind of things are around, then you start to go, oh, actually, there's loads of different things, or people looking in organisations around, what am I looking for volunteers for? And I think there is something you asked me before about what could organisations do. I do think it's about thinking about what are the kind of things you have that would be of most interest to young people. Now, I can understand that people might think, well, that's the same for all people, and wouldn't we be doing that for everyone anyway? And maybe you are. But I think that the other thing, so young people is relational. The other thing is it's always word of mouth with young people. So if you get one young person in and they like what they're doing, they'll tell their friends and their friends will come, so it's very much a word of mouth thing. So if you found something that young people like to do in your org and they think that that's valuable, then you'll end up, that those sort of word of mouth referrals will do all of the work for you.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for sharing your advice and expertise today, Kate. Is there anything else around this topic you wanted to comment on?
Yeah, look, there's also some really interesting youth-led organisations doing work in a volunteering space, and I'd certainly encourage people to check some of those things out. There's some really great organisations that are doing really interesting things with sort of skilling young people up, and they're fully volunteer run. I think what are some of the ones? Oak Tree, UN Youth, they're some of the bigger ones. But I was talking to a young person the other day. She's in northern Sydney. And she and a couple of friends have set up a youth-led volunteering organisation. They want to connect more young people to volunteering. So there's some really cool things happening at a kind of, in that youth-led space as well. And I think that, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So it's also about, well, how do we join the dots between what are those amazing youth-led organisations doing? And maybe some of those young people would also be interested in some of the opportunities that are happening in other volunteering spaces.
Fantastic. Thank you again, Kate, for joining us. I hope our listeners have found today's show interesting and enlightening, and we hope you'll join us again next time for some more practical volunteering tips. Bye for now.
You've been listening to Voices of Volunteering, presented by the Centre for Volunteering. For resources, tools, training and news, head over to our website, volunteering.com.au.